So with me, I have international best-selling author Alison Belsham. Hello, Alison.
Hello there. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's lovely to chat with you. First question, which genre do you write in and how do you define that genre?
I write in crime, which of course is a massive genre, and I specifically write police procedurals, which is a subgenre of crime. It is clearly what it says, police procedurals. It's about police characters solving mysteries, and there's quite, I wouldn't say there's kind of formal definition, but there are tropes within that most writers stick to. You always have the central character is generally a DI, detective inspector. He normally has a sidekick. He normally has a dysfunctional past. A lot of the DIs actually are women now, because crime as a genre is read very much by women. So my first series had a man as the DI, and I'm just starting work now on a new series that has a female DI, because the publisher asked me for that. It's generally always serial killers. The victims have to be innocent. They're nearly always women, but can be young men as well, or boys as well, children. And there seems to be an enormous appetite for books that follow what is really quite a tight formula.
With you writing police procedurals, I've got to ask, does that mean that you have, where do you get your knowledge of police procedures from?
I have a friend who is a retired chief superintendent, and he reads the books for me and lets me know if anything is wrong. But, you know, I write them, I don't necessarily consult him before writing them. I write them using my knowledge gleaned from television shows. And what I found quite interesting, and generally he really doesn't pick up very much and say, oh, that's absolutely wrong. You know, I think most TV shows are actually reasonably well researched. And you can generally see where they're taking liberties. And as a writer of fiction, you can also take liberties. I saw a panel of police procedural writers, and there were 4 of them in a row, and the person, the mediator, said, do you get, you know, how much research do you do? And the first lady to answer said, well, I used to be a DI, I used to be a policeman, and I double check every single bit to make sure its procedure is all fine. And the other 3 were all men, and they said, I don't make it up, I make it up, I make it up. So I think, you know, you don't want to put in anything really glaringly wrong, but at the same time, you want to, and yes, get it read by someone to check that you haven't done anything glaringly wrong. But as one crime writer who was an ex-policewoman, a different one this time, said, I don't ask myself, is this right? I ask myself, could this happen? So she said, you know, so would there be a department here in this particular police force? Maybe there isn't, but there could be. And for fiction, that's fine.
Excellent. So a question that I'm asking everybody that I speak to, what's your writing schedule?
Variable. It's I write during the day. I'm also a freelance copywriter, although I'm doing less and less of that now. So if I have copywriting work, I do that in the morning and write fiction in the afternoon. A lot of the time I don't have copywriting work and I'm just writing fiction during the day. I never write in the evening, I never write at night. That's just, I write better during the day. I'm tired by the evening, and so that's it really. I'm quite flexible with it.
So being a daytime writer, does that mean that you need sort of like quiet, or do you have sort of like music going on around you, or chatter, or?
No, I need absolute silence. Absolute silence, no one else in the room. Sometimes I try and write when I'm on a train, and it's okay if there's no one sitting next to me. But if there's anyone sitting next to me, I can't write, because, you know, not that they're even interested in what's going on in on my laptop or anything, but it somehow inhibits me. Or if one of the members of my family is in the room, I live alone, but I go and visit my children and stuff. So if I'm visiting my children, whatever, if there's someone else in the room, even if they're quietly reading, I'm like, oh no, I can't do it. So I need that sort of solitude and silence to write.
I'm completely with you. I've been speaking to a couple of people who do their writing in cafes, and I don't know how. I couldn't. Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. So for you, which is most important? Is it plot or character?
I would say character should be most important for all writers, most definitely. But having said that, I'm writing a police procedural where the plot is why people read it. So I have to make sure the plot is really good, and I often start with the plot, but if you don't put really strong characters in, you don't carry the reader with you. And for people who read police procedural, the ones that they remember are the ones with the characters. So who are the characters you remember from police procedural? Harry Bosch, Harry Hole,
Morse.
Vera, Jimmy Perez, you know, so those writers are writing really strong characters. And of course their plots have to be strong as well. I mean, in police procedural, you have to have both. But, you know, I think it's a mistake where anyone says plot is more important than character. Those books don't, you can have a kind of amazing plot. Like I think Dan Brown's books are built on plot rather than character, and they're successful to a point, but once you've read one or two of them, I kind of think you don't really bother to, you know, his main character, I can't even remember his name, and there are many more books about him. Yes.
Langdon, yes.
That's it. So, you know, the Da Vinci Code, when it came out, stunning plot, but it didn't carry me into his character didn't carry me onto the rest of the series. So I think you are playing a dangerous game if you give precedence to plot.
I think you're right. There's a couple of other writers who I've read where I really enjoy their stories, but if you read 3 or 4 of them back to back, you can't remember which one you were reading and you lose track. And yeah, I think that's completely down to the whole notion of it being plot heavy. So I've got to ask then, with you working with police procedurals, does that mean you have the plot before you start?
I plot it. Yeah, I'm an extreme plotter. I plot everything out. So I'll start with a sort of little question or scenario, and it's like, what's the crime, who's done it, what's the murder, you know, how are we going to investigate it, whatever. And I build up the story from that, and I build up the plot. I won't write a word until I have a very detailed chapter outline. So I don't write the first word of the book until I know exactly what happens in all of the 60 or 70 chapters that I'm writing. And then I have this on an Excel document, and it's a blueprint. So when I sit down to write every day, I consult the document, and it's like, oh, I'm on chapter 34 today, and this is what happens in chapter 34. And I do stray from it while I'm writing a bit. But, you know, I do that at my peril, and sometimes I have to kind of rein it back again, because crime writing, plot is very important in terms of planting clues and the information that you give to the reader and the information that you give to your character. And sometimes you want the reader to know something first, and sometimes you want your character to know something but not quite reveal it. And I can't imagine trying to write a book like that without knowing what I was doing. It would end up in so many rewrites that, you know, it just...
Thank you. That was the reason why that was important to me, was because I know I've got students who will be there thinking, well, I'm character focused as well, therefore I don't need to plot. But yeah, you just sort of like shown that you're a character focused writer, but plotting is important so the characters can work out where they're going in the story. Yeah,
I mean, I do hear some crime writers saying, oh, I just start writing and I don't even know who did it until the very end of the book. And I think, how can you not know who did it till the end of the book? How can you be laying the appropriate clues? And for me, I have to say I'm a one draft writer. I don't want to go back and rewrite my book that I've already written. I don't want to go back and have to then thread through clues and then have to change each chapter because I've suddenly decided on an early clue. So I write one draft, I then get edits from my editor, which means I do rewrites, because I don't I don't myself do several drafts of a book before I submit it. I don't have time for that.
So what piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting out?
I think the most important thing is perseverance. It really takes time to learn your craft. Yes, you might be a natural writer, but there's still an element of craft that needs to be learned. You think of people who are very musical, and you find some child who's gifted musically and they start learning to play the violin. That doesn't mean that they're going to perform in the Albert Hall next week. It means they're going to go through years of practice and learning, and eventually they become an absolute master at it, and then they get the concert at the Albert Hall. And I think what people think is, oh, I think I could be a good writer, and you could be a good writer, and I will write a book, and they expect that that book will get published. Most writers don't get published till their fourth or fifth attempt at a novel. I think certainly my first one that was published, The Tattoo Thief, is probably the fourth or fifth novel that I wrote. So persevere and learn your craft. It's not always a great favour to a writer to have their first novel published. That's when you hear people saying,
Alison, I've got a barking dog.
You hear people saying, oh my God, I've got to write a second novel and it was really difficult. I don't know how to do it. And that's probably because they've been published before they're ready for it. So I would say, don't think, oh, I'm going to write a novel and it will be published, and if it isn't published, I'm a failure. No, you have to learn it. You probably need to write several novels before you're ready for publication. And if you recognize and accept that, you can work towards that. You know, don't spend 10 years rewriting one novel again and again and again. If it doesn't get published first time round, move on to the second one, move on to the third one, because each time you write something new, you will be improving and learning.
I completely agree with that. Perseverance is one of the things that I stress over and over again. And it's not just perseverance with that first one, but it's also perseverance of, if you've written it and you've got faith and you believe in it, then keep sending the damn thing out. And it's going to find its market eventually. And yeah, when we look at all the people that have been rejected numerous times, we see that.
Yes.
Who do you read?
Sorry?
Who do you read for pleasure?
I think when I became a writer, when I became a published writer, reading for pleasure became a very scarce thing. When I saw that question, I just went, ha ha, reading for pleasure, what is that? Because I now read lots of crime because I like to see what other writers are doing. I get asked to read a lot of new crime books as well, and so I read those. And then I read a lot for research. I'm currently reading a book about online cults in America for research, and it's really quite horrible reading, and I don't really enjoy it, but it's because it's research for a future book. So very occasionally I get a chance to read something for pleasure, and then I don't, just all sorts of different things. It's literally sort of catching up on interesting novels that might have caught my eye over the time period, but mostly I read crime. Pleasure.
And I get that. When I was researching my last novel, it was all about serial killers, and I just got so immersed in it, almost to the point where it was really, really depressing. Listening to podcasts about serial killers, and
that's even more kind of depressing, that you become so immersed in those sorts of things. And
and when you're there sort of thinking, oh, he's rubbish, he's only done 6, him. What a horrible person am I for judging people that way. So
every now and again I read something like a romance or a comedy to remind myself that there is sort of light reading around, but I find it very hard to then choose anything in that genre because I don't know the genre, and I'm like, oh, what should I read? And and then it's like, oh no, I've got another crime book over here I can read.
I go for comfort reading sometimes, and I'll pick up an Enid Blyton, which famous 5, admittedly a little bit racist and very of its time, but they've got a lovely dog, so So
I read Rebecca quite often because it is like such a good book.
aside from being an author of novels, you've got a background in screenwriting. Is there a difference in the way you approach novels and screenwriting, or is the actor storytelling always the same for you?
First, I'd caveat this with the fact that I was never a successful screenwriter. I did a lot of screenwriting, but I was never successful in that field at all. But having said that, I run the Edinburgh Writers Forum, and we have speakers coming to talk to writers. And we invited a woman who writes novels and is a screenwriter, and she made her living for many years as a screenwriter without ever having had anything produced because she got paid options and stuff. So I think, I think many screenwriters write a lot of work and it's very, very difficult to get it produced. But in terms of storytelling, stories are the same. The conventions of writing, of course, are incredibly different. But stories are the same. You need all the same thing. You need strong characters. You need rising tension. You need, a good resolution at the end. That the 3-act shape particularly is particularly important in screenwriting, and I still use that 3-act shape when I'm plotting my own books. I still use sort of the hero's journey and things like that, or Save the Cat for novelists. I use those tools to make sure that the plot works. So I think the storytelling is very similar, but then it's just a different convention of writing, where of course in screenplays you have directions to your characters and you have dialogue, and that's it. There's no description, literally no description. And so
does it involve more visual imagination when you're creating a screenplay, or do you think there's still the same essence of visual imagination, but you have to put more description in then for a novel?
When I write a novel now, I play out the scene in my head as if it's a film.
Right.
That's how I write, and I describe what I'm seeing, and of course I describe my characters' emotional reactions, which you don't do in screenplays. But it's, for me, the visual side of it and how the characters are working within a location is really important to the way I write. So, but of course that doesn't hold for every writer. Everyone writes differently.
So the tattoo thief, did I say tattoo correct? The tattoo, how do you say tattoo?
Yeah, I have problems with that. People say, you say it strangely. I say the tattoo thief. And then I have a friend who's always says, you say that so weirdly. And I think, well, okay, but that's how I say it.
The Tattoo Thief was the winner of a Pitch Perfect event at the Bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival. What does it take to make a successful pitch?
This is something that I'm really passionate about. I teach masterclasses in pitching and everything. When I did that pitch, I wasn't experienced at pitching and I had no idea, and I didn't really kind of look into it too much, and it just happened that I naturally did that pitch, and I only did that pitch to get some feedback. I wasn't thinking about winning, and I won, and it was like, shocked. It doesn't begin to cover it. What you need for a successful pitch is, there are two things. A is practice. So if it's a live pitch, you should write it well before your pitching event and practice it. If you're going to do a TED talk, they expect you to have practiced the TED talk about 200 times. And everyone who does a TED talk looks amazingly good at public speaking, don't they? Yeah. And that's because they have literally practiced it hundreds of times. And so, what you need to do is your 3-minute pitch. Bloody Scotland is a 3-minute pitch. You practice it, you time yourself so that you use 3 minutes and you don't go over, you never go over. But when it comes to actually writing the pitch, take the premise of your novel and build up from there. Do not take the plot of your novel and try and condense it into 3 minutes. You can't do that. That is impossible, because what can I leave out? And you hear people pitching and they talk faster and faster and faster because they're trying to fit in every subplot and every character, and that's impossible, and it ends up being a sort of garbled pitch. So take the premise, which is, if you're not entirely sure what the premise of your novel is, you need to work it out. It is, when X happens to Y, he does Z, or whatever it is, you know, your character, his problem, movement towards some sort of resolution in one sentence. Take that one sentence premise for your novel and build outwards to whatever time you've got, whether it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever. So build it up. Don't try and condense it down. That's my main tip for pitch writing.
Brilliant, incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. And a side question to that, and it probably sounds like a silly one, but do you give away the ending of a story in a pitch meeting?
Yes, you should. If you're pitching to editors and agents, yes, always they want to know the ending. If you're pitching to a live audience and you don't want to totally spoil it, you can, you know, there are ways of doing it without giving a massive spoiler for a huge plot twist if you're doing a pitch in public. But if you're literally pitching to an agent or an editor, yeah, they want to know the end. They want to know what your twist is, because that's what might sell the book to them. I always think it's a shame. I kind of hate giving the plots to my agent and my editor, because I think actually I'd rather you read it and got the kind of shock at the end or whatever, so we can see how that works. But no, you know, this is their professional judgment and whatever, and they want to know the ending.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying before, it's so difficult to read for pleasure once you're a writer. So it must be awful for these people who don't even get the pleasure of writing. They just, they get spoilers all the time. So a couple of days ago, you tweeted that you were working on a particularly unpleasant scene that was giving you no end of pleasure. Do you think it's common for writers to enjoy the grislier aspects of their work? And do you think that's particularly applicable to crime writing?
I think it's definitely applicable to crime writing. I'm not sure that, you know, the other genres, I don't know, they probably don't have very much grisly stuff in there. And I think with crime writing, I don't know why people find it so much fun to write the gory stuff. I certainly enjoy it. And then sometimes my editor comes back and says, could you just dial that down a bit? It's much too gross. It's just kind of like, how much can I shock the reader?
Yeah, and I think shocking the reader, that's why we're writing crime, isn't it? We're writing crime to, get that sort of reaction from readers. I mean, obviously with the police procedural, you want the conclusion to show that justice has prevailed and that villains don't get away with it. But we also want to see what it was that villains thought they were getting away with as well.
I mean, you know, you have to have a really kind of gory murder now to kind of, the reader wants to be frightened, and then they want the comfort at the end of knowing that the villain has been caught and that justice has prevailed. You now hear editors saying that crime fiction has to have murder in it. You know, I think there used to be crime fiction that was about jewel robberies and heists and bank robberies and stuff like that, and you still get that in the movies, but you don't get many books now in crime that are not actually about a murder. And I think there's a sort of reader expectation. There have to be bodies, and there literally has to be more than one murder. You always start with a murder, and you have to have more murders going through to keep racking up the tension. You know, I don't know why people want to read about them so much, but they do.
And I think SS Van Dyne in his 20 rules for writing crime stories had actually put that it must be a murder, that no other crime is suitable for fiction. But it's a very didactic list of rules that he put down there.
I think when I'm talking about rules like this, I'm talking about commercial fiction specifically. I particularly write commercial fiction. I want to make money out of my writing. I'm interested in selling as many copies as I can. Yep. Of course, you know, people can write whatever they want, and they can write experimental fiction, and they can rip up all the rules, and that's absolutely fine. But if you want to sell to a big publishing house and make money, you do that at your peril. So it depends what you're writing for, what your aim is.
My final question for you, Alison, what are you currently working on and where can we find more of your work?
So I'm currently working on 2 series at the moment. So the first series is a series that I've co-written with my brother, and it's set in Afghanistan. He used to live out there in the early 2000s, and I said to him, let's write a police procedural set in Kabul. And so we did that. That is published on the 31st of March, and it's called Death in Kabul. And it's about, there are 2 characters. There's a Met policeman who is working out their training Afghan police, and he gets seconded onto a murder investigation with the Afghan police. But what's very interesting about this as a police procedural is suddenly he realizes he's in Afghanistan. There's no DNA, there's no sort of database of DNA, there's no fingerprinting, there's no forensics, no proper forensic tests. It's absolutely going back to having none of that sort of battery of stuff that he would have had in his previous life as a policeman in the UK. And of course, the police methods out in Afghanistan are very different. And so there's this sort of clash of cultures, fish out of water. He also meets an American woman journalist who's tracking down antiquity thefts that are going on. And they start working together and solve the mystery, of course. That's not a spoiler because, you know, as I've said, I'm writing in this genre where the mystery gets solved. That's coming out, that's the start of a series, and the second one is called Death in Helmand, and that's being edited at the moment. And then I've just started writing for a different publisher, which hasn't been announced yet. So watch this space. I think it's going to be announced on Friday. A new police procedural series with a woman DI, and that's going to be set down in Canterbury. And they're going to be cases sort of all over Kent. And it's woman DI versus serial killer.
Really, really looking forward to them. Alison, thank you so much for your time. That's been greatly appreciated.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. So take care and good luck with your writing, everybody.
Thank you.